Who let this black kid into my classroom? Professor Hartwell's voice rang through the lecture hall. 23 years teaching, big salary. Nobody could touch him. You in the back row, the black one, stand up. Isaiah Parker stood up, 19 years old. Silent. Look at this. A black face in advanced number theory. Hartwell laughed. Food stamps, welfare family, government housing. Did your social worker fill out your application, or did some diversity committee drag you here to meet their numbers? Before we begin, write your name and where in the world you are watching from in the comments below. He picked up the chalk. I'm going to write an impossible equation. PhDs have failed this. Geniuses have quit. And you, street trash, you're going to prove why black kids don't belong in real math. The chalk scratched against the board. Isaiah stared at the equation. What Hartwell did next would cost him everything. His job, his reputation, his biggest secret. Let me tell you who Isaiah Parker really was. Because Professor Hartwell had no idea, not a clue, and that mistake would destroy him. Isaiah was 19 years old, a second-year student at Whitmore University, the youngest in advanced number theory by 2 full years. Every day he sat in the back row, same seat, same corner, the spot where nobody looked twice. He never raised his hand, never volunteered answers, never showed anyone what he could really do. His homework was right, but nothing special. B+ grades. Nothing that stood out. Nothing threatening. That was on purpose. See, Isaiah had learned something early. A lesson his grandmother taught him when he was just a boy. Don't let them see everything you got. Save something for when you need it. Being seen had a price. Being noticed meant being targeted. In his neighborhood, in his schools, in every place where black boys were expected to fail. So Isaiah made himself invisible, a ghost hiding in plain sight. But here's what nobody knew, what nobody could have guessed. Mini cliffhanger. Isaiah Parker had been solving graduate-level math since he was 15 years old. Self-taught. No tutor, no fancy school, no expensive programs, no connections. Just him. Late nights, cold coffee, and a stack of notebooks he found in his grandmother's attic when he was 13. Those notebooks changed everything. They didn't belong to Isaiah. They belonged to his father, a man named James Parker, a man who died when Isaiah was only 6 years old. Isaiah barely remembered him. Just pieces, parts of a puzzle he could never complete. A warm hand on his shoulder. The smell of chalk dust on clothes. A deep voice saying words that burned into his memory forever. Numbers don't lie, son. People do. That was it. That was all he had. Isaiah stared at the ceiling of his dorm room at 3 in the morning, those words echoing in his head. Numbers don't lie, son. People do. He'd been awake for 6 hours since Professor Hartwell's email arrived, the one that changed everything. Academic integrity violation, formal hearing scheduled. Evidence suggests unauthorized assistance. The laptop screen glowed in the darkness. Isaiah read the charges again, his hands shaking with rage rather than fear. Cheating. They were accusing him of cheating on a problem that mathematicians had struggled with for decades. A problem he'd solved in 94 seconds because his father had shown him the path 24 years ago. But how could he explain that without sounding insane? Isaiah pulled on his jacket and walked across campus to the warehouse where he worked nights. The security guard waved him through without looking up. The building hummed with the sound of conveyor belts and sorting machines, but Isaiah needed the familiar rhythm to think clearly. He found an empty corner and called his mother. "Baby, it's 3 in the morning. What's wrong? Linda Parker's voice carried the worry of a woman who'd raised a son alone for 13 years. Mom, I need to ask you something about Dad. Silence stretched across the phone line. His mother never talked about James Parker beyond the basics. Brilliant mathematician. Took his own life when Isaiah was 6. End of story. What about him? Did he ever study at Whitmore University? The silence grew longer. Isaiah heard his mother's sharp intake of breath. Why are you asking me this, Isaiah? Because my professor knew him. Professor Hartwell. He said Dad's name like he remembered him. Richard Hartwell. His mother's voice dropped to a whisper. You know him? Isaiah, listen to me carefully. Come home this weekend. Don't talk to anyone about your father until we speak face to face. The line went dead. Isaiah stared at his phone, more confused than before. His mother had recognized Hartwell's name immediately. There was history there, buried under years of silence. Friday afternoon, Isaiah took the train back to Chicago's South Side. The familiar streets felt different now, like he was seeing them through new eyes. His mother waited at the kitchen table, a cardboard box sitting in front of her like an unexploded bomb. Sit down, baby. Isaiah had never seen this box before. Linda opened it carefully, revealing stacks of papers, notebooks, and photographs. The handwriting on the notebooks was precise, mathematical equations flowing across pages in neat rows. Your father was a graduate student at Whitmore from 1994 to 1995. He was working on his PhD in number theory under Professor Richard Hartwell. Isaiah's stomach dropped. What happened? Linda pulled out a newspaper clipping from 1995. Whitmore professor publishes breakthrough research in advanced number theory. The byline read, Dr. Richard Hartwell. Your father wrote that paper, Linda said quietly. Every equation, every proof, every insight. He submitted it as his dissertation research in February 1995. Isaiah grabbed one of the notebooks, recognizing the equation he'd solved in class. His father's notes filled the margins, explaining the breakthrough that had taken mathematicians decades to approach. Hartwell stole it? Worse. When your father tried to fight back, Hartwell accused him of plagiarism, said James had stolen the work from him. The university believed the professor over the graduate student. They expelled your father and threatened criminal charges. Linda's hands trembled as she pulled out a letter. Your father wrote this the night before he died. He knew no one would believe him. Hartwell had destroyed his reputation, his career, his future. James couldn't face a life where everyone thought he was a thief. Isaiah read the letter, his father's words burning into his memory. The truth is in the numbers. Someday, someone will see what Hartwell really is. I pray it won't be too late. Why didn't you tell me? Isaiah's voice cracked. Because I was protecting you. I didn't want you to carry that burden. I thought if you never knew, you could just focus on your own dreams. Linda wiped her eyes. But now, Hartwell is trying to destroy you too. Isaiah stood up, pacing the small kitchen. He knew who I was the moment he saw my name on the roster. Parker isn't common. He's been waiting for this. What are you going to do? I'm going to fight back. Dad couldn't prove the truth 24 years ago, but I can prove it now. Isaiah spent the weekend copying every document, every notebook, every piece of evidence his father had left behind. The hearing was scheduled for Tuesday after Thanksgiving break, giving him minimal time to prepare. The timing wasn't coincidental. Most faculty would be away, most students gone home. The university was counting on a quiet, quick dismissal. Monday morning, Isaiah walked into the dean's office to file his own formal complaint against Professor Hartwell. The secretary looked surprised when he requested an academic misconduct investigation. Against a professor? Yes, academic theft, falsification of research, and abuse of power. The secretary's eyebrows rose. I'll need documentation. Isaiah handed her a thick folder. 24 years' worth. Tuesday arrived gray and cold. Isaiah sat in the hearing room across from Professor Hartwell, who looked confident and relaxed. The three-person panel consisted of administrators Isaiah had never seen before. No mathematics faculty, no independent experts. The fix was obvious. Mr. Parker, the dean began, you're accused of receiving unauthorized assistance on Professor Hartwell's examination. How do you respond? I solved that problem using methods my father developed in 1994. Methods that Professor Hartwell stole and published under his own name. Hartwell leaned forward, his voice smooth and condescending. Mr. Parker, grief can cause young people to create elaborate fantasies. Your accusations are not only false, but deeply inappropriate. Then, explain how I solved an equation that supposedly stumped mathematicians for decades in 94 seconds, because someone gave you the answer beforehand. Isaiah pulled out his father's notebook, opening to the exact page. My father, James Parker, was your graduate student 24 years ago. This is his original research, dated 8 months before you published it. The panel exchanged glances. The dean cleared his throat. Mr. Parker, we're here to address your academic integrity violation, not revisit ancient history. Ancient history? Isaiah's voice rose. My father killed himself because of what this man did to him. And now Hartwell is trying to destroy me the same way. Hartwell stood up, his face red with anger. I will not sit here and listen to these slanderous accusations from a cheating student who clearly inherited his father's unstable mental state. The room fell silent. Isaiah felt something break inside his chest, a dam that had held back 24 years of buried pain and rage. My father wasn't unstable. He was destroyed by a thief who stole his life's work and then called him crazy when he tried to get it back. The dean banged her gavel. Mr. Parker, control yourself, or this hearing will end immediately. Isaiah looked around the room, seeing the same dismissal his father had faced. The same institutional protection for the powerful. The same willingness to sacrifice truth for convenience. But Isaiah had something his father didn't. He had time, evidence, and the mathematical genius to prove every word. Schedule a second hearing, Isaiah said quietly. Give me 2 weeks to present my full case with proper expert witnesses. If I can't prove Professor Hartwell built his career on stolen work, I'll accept any punishment you impose. The panel huddled in whispered conversation. Finally, the dean nodded. 2 weeks, Mr. Parker. But understand, if your accusations prove false, you'll face expulsion and possible legal action for defamation. Isaiah gathered his father's notebooks, his hands steady now. I understand, and Professor Hartwell should understand something too. My father couldn't fight back because he was alone. But I'm not alone, and I'm not going anywhere. He walked out of the hearing room carrying 24 years of buried truth, finally ready to let the numbers speak for themselves. That evening, Isaiah sat alone in his cramped dorm room, his father's notebooks spread across the narrow desk. The familiar scent of old paper and faded ink surrounded him as he traced the elegant mathematical proofs with his finger. Each page told a story of genius cut short, of work that should have changed the field forever. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Dr. Lydia Moore standing in the hallway, her usually composed expression marked by something he hadn't seen before: vulnerability. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. Isaiah stepped aside, noting how she seemed smaller outside the classroom, her authority stripped away by whatever brought her here. She glanced at the notebooks covering his desk, her breath catching slightly. "Those are his, aren't they? James Parker's work." "You knew my father?" Dr. Moore moved closer to the desk, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting. "I was a graduate student here in 1994. Your father was brilliant, Isaiah. Absolutely brilliant." Her voice carried weight, each word deliberate. "And I watched Richard Hartwell destroy him." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of the dormitory heating system. Isaiah studied her face, seeing something crumble in her careful professional mask. "Tell me what happened." She sat on the edge of his bed, her hands clasped tightly. James submitted his research proposal in September 1994. Revolutionary work on prime distribution patterns that could have redefined number theory. I was in the department office when he turned it in, so excited he could barely contain himself. Her voice grew quieter. 3 months later, Hartwell presented nearly identical work at the Winter Mathematics Conference. When James confronted him, Hartwell claimed James had plagiarized from his unpublished research. He had tenure, reputation, connections. James was just a graduate student from the south side of Chicago. "Why didn't you say anything?" The question came out harder than Isaiah intended. Dr. Moore's composure finally broke. "Because I was terrified. I was the only black graduate student in the program, barely surviving myself. Hartwell made it clear that anyone who supported James would face the same fate." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I've lived with that cowardice for 24 years. Isaiah felt anger building in his chest, but it wasn't directed at her. It was the familiar rage he'd carried his entire life, finally given shape and target. "That's why you're here now. I can't bring your father back, but I can help you finish what he started." She stood, her professional demeanor returning. "We need proof. Dated documents, submission records, anything that establishes timeline." "The university archives?" "Exactly. But we'll need administrative access, and Hartwell has allies throughout the department." She paused, considering. "However, I have something else. My MIT connections." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Benjamin Crawford was my doctoral advisor. He's emeritus now, but still one of the most respected mathematicians in the country. If we can demonstrate your abilities independently, prove that your knowledge comes from legitimate sources rather than cheating, it undermines Hartwell's entire case." "How?" "An evaluation panel. 3 independent mathematicians who can verify your mathematical understanding. But here's the twist. I've been thinking about the timing. Your father was at Whitmore in 1994-95. So was someone else who might remember him." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts. "Dr. Gregory Sullivan. He's at Princeton now, highly respected. But in 1994, he was a graduate student here, working on his dissertation." Isaiah felt his pulse quicken. "You think he knew my father?" "I think he witnessed what happened. The question is whether he'll admit it." Dr. Moore's fingers hovered over her phone. "I need to make some calls. But first, we're going to the archives tomorrow morning. Early, before Hartwell realizes what we're doing. What if we don't find anything? Then we make sure your evaluation is so compelling that no one can question your abilities. Your father's notebooks contain advanced techniques that weren't published until years later. If you can demonstrate that knowledge, explain those methods, it proves you learned from him, not from cheating." Isaiah looked down at the notebooks, seeing them differently now. Not just his father's legacy, but evidence in a case 24 years in the making. "Dr. Moore," Why mathematics? With everything you saw happen to my father, why stay? She smiled sadly. Because numbers don't lie, even when people do. Because your father believed that truth would eventually surface, and someone needed to be here when it did. She headed toward the door, then turned back. Your father would be proud of you, Isaiah. Not just for your talent, but for your courage. After she left, Isaiah returned to his desk, but now the notebooks felt different in his hands. They weren't just mathematical theories anymore. They were weapons in a war that started before he was born. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to his mother, his fingers steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to ask. Mom, I need to know everything. About Dad's time at Whitmore. About why he really left. About what happened in those final months. The truth this time. All of it. He hit send, knowing that tomorrow would bring either vindication or the complete collapse of everything he'd believed about his father's legacy. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Isaiah Parker wasn't facing it alone. The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the institutional concrete of Whitmore's administrative building. Dr. Moore waited for him outside the archives, 2 cups of coffee steaming in the frigid air. "Ready?" she asked, handing him a cup. "Ready?" They approached the archives desk where a tired-looking graduate assistant barely looked up from her computer screen. "We need access to graduate program records from 1994-95, Dr. Moore said, her faculty ID prominently displayed. "Research purposes?" "Academic integrity investigation, department business." The assistant shrugged and led them to a cramped basement room lined with filing cabinets and boxes. "Everything from that period should be in Section G. Let me know when you're done." As soon as they were alone, Dr. Moore moved directly to the appropriate section, while Isaiah stood guard near the door. The sound of shuffling papers filled the small space as she searched through submission records, grade reports, and departmental correspondence. "Here," she whispered, pulling out a manila folder. "Graduate research submissions, fall 1994. Inside, they found exactly what they'd hoped for. James Parker's original research proposal, stamped with a submission date of September 15, 1994. The mathematical proofs were identical to those in his notebooks, written in the same careful handwriting that Isaiah had studied for years. "Now we need Hartwell's publication date," Dr. Moore said, already moving to another section. They found it in the conference proceedings, December 1994, 3 months after his father's submission. The evidence was clear, undeniable, archived in the university's own records. "This proves it," Isaiah breathed. "This proves theft. But we still need to prove you learned from your father legitimately. Not from some elaborate coaching scheme Hartwell will inevitably claim." She photographed both documents with her phone. Time for Phase 2. Back in her office, Dr. Moore dialed Dr. Crawford's number while Isaiah listened, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Ben, it's Lydia Moore." "Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I need a favor." "A big one." She explained the situation carefully, professionally, while Isaiah tried to read her expression for any sign of how the conversation was going. 3 mathematicians, independent evaluation, completely confidential until we have results. "Yes, I understand the implications." "No, I'm certain about the evidence." A long pause. "Thank you, Ben. This means everything." She hung up and turned to Isaiah with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Dr. Crawford will chair the panel. He's bringing in Dr. Sarah Chen from Stanford and—" She paused dramatically. "Dr. Gregory Sullivan from Princeton." Isaiah felt the air leave his lungs. "Sullivan agreed?" Apparently, Ben didn't mention the connection when he called, but Sullivan's already committed. Whether that works for us or against us, we'll find out soon enough. When? Tomorrow afternoon. 3 hours, comprehensive evaluation. They'll test everything. Your understanding of advanced theory, problem-solving approaches, even your ability to derive results from first principles. She leaned back in her chair. Isaiah, this is your chance to show them that your mind works the same way your father's did. That genius like that doesn't come from cheating. It comes from blood. That evening, Isaiah called his mother. Her voice sounded smaller than usual, weighted with years of buried secrets finally demanding release. I got your email, she said quietly. I suppose it's time. Isaiah arrived at the mathematics building 30 minutes early, his father's notebooks pressed against his chest like armor. The November sky hung gray and heavy over Whitmore's campus, matching the weight in his stomach. Through the tall windows of Crawford Hall, he could see students hurrying between classes, their faces bright with the simple concerns of homework and weekend plans. He pushed through the heavy oak doors and climbed to the 4th floor. Room 412 was larger than he'd expected. A conference room with a polished mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs. 2 men and 1 woman sat at the far end, their papers spread in neat stacks, coffee cups steaming in the morning light. Dr. Benjamin Crawford looked exactly like his MIT faculty photo, only grayer. His wire-rimmed glasses caught the fluorescent light as he stood to shake Isaiah's hand. Mr. Parker, thank you for making the trip up from Chicago. Dr. Crawford, thank you for agreeing to do this. The second man was younger, maybe 45, with nervous energy that made him tap his pen against his notepad. Dr. Marcus Chen, Princeton, he said, half standing. I've reviewed your transcript. Impressive work for a sophomore. The third panel member remained seated until Crawford cleared his throat. And this is Dr. Gregory Sullivan, also Princeton. Isaiah's breath caught. Sullivan was older than he'd imagined, maybe 62, with silver hair and deep lines around his eyes. When he finally looked up, those eyes held something Isaiah couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Mr. Parker. Sullivan's voice was careful, measured. Please, sit. Isaiah took the chair across from them, setting his father's notebooks on the table. Crawford noticed immediately. Are those research materials you'd like us to consider? They were my father's, James Parker. The silence that followed was electric. Chen looked confused, glancing between Crawford and Sullivan. Crawford's expression remained neutral, but Sullivan's face went pale. I see, Crawford said finally. Well, let's begin with some standard problems. Dr. Chen, would you start us off? For the next hour, Chen walked Isaiah through increasingly complex proofs. Topology, abstract algebra, real analysis, problems that graduate students struggled with. Isaiah's pencil moved across the whiteboard in steady strokes, his father's methods flowing through him like muscle memory. Elegant, Chen murmured, after Isaiah solved a particularly nasty differential equation. Your approach to the substitution is unconventional. It's based on work from the mid-90s, Isaiah said, glancing at Sullivan. A technique for handling systems with irregular boundary conditions. Sullivan shifted in his chair. His pen had stopped moving entirely. Crawford leaned forward. Can you show us the derivation for that technique? Isaiah opened one of his father's notebooks, the pages yellow with age. The mathematics inside was dense, revolutionary, 24 years ahead of its time. As he transcribed his father's work onto the whiteboard, he watched Sullivan in his peripheral vision. The older man's hands were trembling. This is remarkable, Chen said. Where did this method originate? James Parker developed it in 1994, Isaiah said, his voice steady. Before it was appropriated by others. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Crawford set down his coffee cup with a soft clink. Mr. Parker, are you suggesting academic misconduct? I'm stating a fact. Sullivan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I need some air. Crawford frowned. Greg, we're in the middle of 5 minutes. Sullivan was already moving toward the door. I just need 5 minutes. Isaiah watched him go, then looked back at Crawford and Chen. Should I continue? Please. For another hour, Isaiah demonstrated mathematical intuition that shouldn't exist in someone his age. He solved problems by seeing patterns others missed, by approaching equations from angles that revealed hidden simplicity. It was his father's gift, refined and focused through years of studying those worn notebooks. When they finished, Chen was shaking his head in amazement. Remarkable. Truly remarkable. Crawford nodded slowly. We'll need to discuss our findings, but, Mr. Parker, what we've seen today strongly suggests that your abilities are both genuine and exceptional. Thank you. However, Crawford continued, there are still questions about the source of your knowledge. These techniques you've shown us, they're sophisticated beyond typical undergraduate exposure. They came from my father, who studied here in 1994 to 95, Crawford said carefully. Yes. Under Professor Hartwell. Yes. The door opened and Sullivan returned, his face flushed from the cold. He sat heavily, avoiding Isaiah's eyes. Crawford gathered his papers. Mr. Parker, thank you for your time. Dr. Chen and I need to compile our evaluation. We'll have our report to Dr. Moore by tomorrow morning. Isaiah stood, collecting his father's notebooks. Dr. Sullivan, could I speak with you privately? Just for a moment? Sullivan looked up, startled. What about? My father. Chen and Crawford exchanged glances. Crawford nodded. We'll wait downstairs, Greg. Take your time. The door closed behind them, leaving Isaiah alone with the man who might hold the key to everything. Sullivan sat motionless, staring at his hands. You knew him, Isaiah said. It wasn't a question. Sullivan's shoulders sagged. Yes. What happened? For a long moment, Sullivan didn't respond. Then, slowly, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I've been carrying this for 24 years. He slid a photograph across the table. It showed 2 young men standing outside a university library, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. One was clearly Sullivan, younger, with dark hair. The other looked exactly like Isaiah. Your father, Sullivan whispered. We were graduate students together. Best friends, actually. Isaiah stared at the photo. His father looked so young, so alive, so hopeful. What happened to him? Sullivan closed his eyes. Hartwell destroyed him. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush. Sullivan told him about the research group, about his father's breakthrough work on nonlinear systems, about the night James Parker came to him with proof that Hartwell was stealing his ideas. I told him to keep quiet, Sullivan said, his voice breaking. I told him it would hurt his career, that no one would believe a grad student over a tenured professor. I was a coward. You were protecting yourself. I was protecting myself while they destroyed him. Hartwell published James's work under his own name 6 months later. When your father tried to fight back, Hartwell accused him of plagiarism. The university believed Hartwell. Your father was expelled, blacklisted. His academic career was over before it started. Isaiah's hands clenched into fists. And you said nothing. I said nothing. Tears were running down Sullivan's cheeks now. I got my PhD. I got my job at Princeton. I built my whole career on my silence. But I never forgot what I saw. I never forgot what Hartwell did to your father. Sullivan reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a handwritten letter. James wrote this the night before he died. He sent it to me. I never opened it until yesterday, after Dr. Crawford told me your name. Isaiah's hands shook as he took the letter. His father's handwriting, careful and precise. Greg, if you're reading this, then you know what I've decided. I can't fight this anymore. They've won. But someday, maybe my son will be old enough to understand what really happened. When that day comes, I need you to tell him the truth. I need you to help him reclaim what they stole from me. Please don't let my work die with me. James. Isaiah read the letter 3 times before he could speak. He knew. He knew Hartwell would keep stealing, keep destroying people. He wanted to make sure someone would remember the truth. Sullivan pulled out a legal pad and began writing. His hand moved quickly, filling page after page with precise, detailed statements. Times, dates, conversations, evidence. 24 years of suppressed testimony pouring onto paper. I can't bring your father back, Sullivan said as he wrote, but I can make sure everyone knows what Hartwell did to him, what he's been doing to others all these years. Isaiah watched the confession take shape, watched 24 years of injustice finally being documented. When Sullivan finished, he signed his name with a flourish and dated it. This is my official statement regarding the academic misconduct of Professor Richard Hartwell and the theft of research conducted by James Parker in 1994 to 95. He looked up at Isaiah. It's enough to destroy him. Isaiah took the statement, feeling its weight. Why now? Why finally tell the truth? Sullivan smiled sadly. Because when I saw you solve those problems today, when I saw your father's methods flowing through you like blood through veins, I realized something. James Parker isn't really dead. He lives in you. His genius, his integrity, his courage. It's all there in you. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the campus where it had all begun. Your father was the most brilliant mathematician I ever knew. Hartwell stole his work, but he couldn't steal his legacy. That legacy is standing right here in this room. Isaiah folded the confession carefully and slipped it into his notebook alongside his father's research. For the first time in weeks, he felt something other than anger or fear. He felt hope. Dr. Sullivan? Thank you. Sullivan turned from the window. No, Isaiah, thank you for giving me the chance to finally do what I should have done 24 years ago. They shook hands, and Isaiah felt the weight of his father's story shifting. No longer a burden carried alone, but a truth shared, validated, ready to be heard. Tomorrow would bring the hearing. Tomorrow would bring Hartwell and his lawyers and his 23 years of institutional protection. But tonight, for the first time since this all began, Isaiah Parker knew he wouldn't be facing them alone. The hearing room in Whitmore's administration building buzzed with tension at 9 sharp Tuesday morning. Isaiah sat at the respondent's table, his father's original notebooks spread before him like battle plans. Dr. Moore occupied the chair beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. Across the room, Hartwell commanded his position with practiced authority, flanked by 2 university lawyers in expensive suits. Dean Patricia Westbrook called the session to order. The academic integrity panel consisted of 3 faculty members Isaiah had never seen before, their faces neutral masks that revealed nothing. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting sharp rectangles across the polished conference table. "We're here to address charges of academic dishonesty brought against Mr. Isaiah Parker," Dean Westbrook began, her voice crisp and professional. "Professor Hartwell, please present your case." Hartwell rose slowly, adjusting his tie with deliberate precision. "Thank you, Dean Westbrook. What we have here is a clear case of premeditated cheating." He gestured toward Isaiah with theatrical disappointment. "Mr. Parker solved a complex equation that has challenged mathematicians for decades. In my 23 years of teaching, I have never witnessed such a dramatic departure from a student's demonstrated abilities." He paced before the panel, commanding the room like a courtroom prosecutor. "The solution required knowledge of advanced techniques that Mr. Parker has never encountered in any course. The speed of his work suggests prior knowledge of the answer, not genuine mathematical insight." Isaiah's jaw tightened, but Dr. Moore's hand touched his arm in gentle restraint. "Furthermore," Hartwell continued, "when questioned about his methodology, Mr. Parker provided vague explanations that failed to demonstrate true understanding. This performance represents everything wrong with lowered academic standards and social promotion." The words hit their target. Isaiah felt the familiar sting of coded language, the systematic diminishment wrapped in academic concern. Dean Westbrook nodded toward Dr. Moore. "Dr. Moore, you may present your response." Dr. Moore stood, her movements deliberate and confident. "Thank you, Dean Westbrook. Before we address the specific charges, I believe this panel needs to understand the full context of this situation." She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "What Professor Hartwell has failed to mention is that he has a personal history with Mr. Parker's family. A history that directly relates to the equation in question." Hartwell's confident expression flickered. "I don't know what Dr. Moore is suggesting, but—" "I'm suggesting," Dr. Moore interrupted, "that 24 years ago, you destroyed Isaiah's father, James Parker, over this exact same mathematical work." The room fell silent. Even the lawyers leaned forward. Dr. Moore distributed copies of documents to the panel. "These are James Parker's original research proposals, dated and submitted to this university in 1994. They outline the mathematical framework that Professor Hartwell later published under his own name." Hartwell's face flushed red. "This is outrageous! Dean Westbrook, Dr. Moore is clearly—" "I'm not finished," Dr. Moore stated firmly. "Dr. Gregory Sullivan from Princeton has provided a sworn statement regarding events he witnessed as a graduate student here in 1995. She handed the panel Sullivan's written confession. Isaiah watched the panel members' faces change as they read, skepticism transforming into concern. "Professor Hartwell," Dean Westbrook said carefully, "do you care to respond to these allegations?" Hartwell's composure cracked. "This is clearly a coordinated attack designed to distract from Mr. Parker's academic dishonesty. These documents could have been fabricated. Dr. Sullivan's statement represents a misremembering of events from decades ago." "Actually," Dr. Moore said, reaching for her laptop, "we have additional testimony." The screen flickered to life, and Dr. Benjamin Crawford's distinguished face appeared via video link from MIT. "Good morning," Dr. Crawford said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I've reviewed the mathematical work in question, both James Parker's original research and the subsequent publications attributed to Professor Hartwell. The similarities are not coincidental." Hartwell shot to his feet. "This is a farce. Dr. Crawford wasn't involved in the original research. He has no standing to—" "Professor Hartwell," Dr. Crawford continued calmly, "I was James Parker's external advisor on this project. He shared his breakthroughs with me before submitting them to Whitmore. Your version appeared 6 months later, with minimal modifications. The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Isaiah felt his father's vindication beginning, 24 years overdue. Dr. Crawford's image leaned forward slightly. I've also evaluated Isaiah Parker's mathematical abilities independently. His solution methodology demonstrates genuine understanding of techniques his father pioneered. This young man possesses remarkable talent, not academic dishonesty. Hartwell's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Hartwell waved him away. Even if these wild accusations were true, which they absolutely are not, they have no bearing on Mr. Parker's current misconduct. Don't they? Dr. Moore asked quietly. Isaiah solved that equation using his father's methods. Methods his father developed before you stole them and claimed them as your own. She turned to address the panel directly. Gentlemen, we're not just dealing with academic integrity here. We're dealing with academic justice. James Parker took his own life because Professor Hartwell accused him of plagiarizing his own work. His 6-year-old son watched his father's career and reputation destroyed by the very system that should have protected him. Isaiah felt tears threatening, but held them back. This was his father's moment as much as his own. Dean Westbrook studied the documents before her. Professor Hartwell, these are serious allegations. The timeline evidence appears substantial. Appears substantial? Hartwell's voice rose dangerously. Dean Westbrook, I've served this university faithfully for 23 years. My reputation and contributions speak for themselves. This attack represents everything wrong with modern academia's obsession with victimization narratives. The room temperature seemed to drop. Isaiah saw the panel members exchange glances at Hartwell's words. Dr. Moore stepped forward. Professor Hartwell just revealed exactly why this case matters. He sees justice as a threat to his comfort. He sees accountability as an attack on his privilege. She gestured toward Isaiah. This young man solved an equation in 94 seconds that built on his father's stolen work. Instead of celebrating mathematical genius, Professor Hartwell's first instinct was to criminalize it because it came from a black student. Isaiah found his voice. Dean Westbrook, may I speak? She nodded. Isaiah stood slowly, feeling the weight of generations. My father, James Parker, was brilliant. He loved mathematics the way other people love music or poetry. Professor Hartwell didn't just steal his research. He stole his future. He stole his legacy. He stole his life. His voice grew stronger with each word. For 24 years, my family carried the shame of my father's supposed failure. My mother worked 2 jobs to support us after he died. She never talked about his mathematics because Professor Hartwell had poisoned that well. Isaiah picked up his father's notebook. But mathematical truth doesn't care about power or politics or privilege. These equations don't recognize tenure or titles or skin color. They just exist, waiting for minds capable of understanding them. He opened the notebook to the page containing the solution. My father wrote this proof 24 years ago. Professor Hartwell published a modified version and built his career on it. When I solved that equation in class, I wasn't cheating. I was honoring my father's memory. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Isaiah continued, his voice steady. Professor Hartwell accused me of cheating because he couldn't imagine that a 19-year-old black kid from Chicago's South Side might possess the same mathematical intuition that he stole from my father. He saw my success as impossible rather than inevitable. Hartwell's face had gone pale. This is emotional manipulation designed to— Professor Hartwell, Dean Westbrook interrupted sharply. I think you've said enough. She turned back to Isaiah. Mr. Parker, thank you for your statement. This panel will need time to review all the evidence presented today. Dr. Moore reached for her phone. Dean Westbrook, there's one more piece of evidence. Dr. Sullivan is available by phone, if you'd like to hear his testimony directly. Within minutes, Sullivan's voice filled the room through the speaker. His words came slowly, weighted with decades of guilt. I was there when James Parker presented his research. I was there when Professor Hartwell claimed it as his own. I was there when James tried to fight back, and Professor Hartwell destroyed him. Sullivan's voice broke slightly. I was a coward. I stayed silent because I was afraid for my own career. James Parker died because people like me chose comfort over courage. I won't make that mistake again. The confession shattered Hartwell's remaining defenses. His lawyers whispered urgently, but he seemed beyond their reach. Dean Westbrook studied the assembled evidence for long minutes. Finally, she spoke. Based on the testimony and documentation presented, this panel finds no evidence of academic dishonesty by Mr. Isaiah Parker. All charges are dismissed. Isaiah felt his knees weaken with relief. Furthermore, she continued, given the serious allegations raised today, I am ordering a formal investigation into Professor Hartwell's conduct, both current and historical. Hartwell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a witch hunt, 23 years of service, and this is how— Professor Hartwell, Dean Westbrook said firmly, I suggest you contact the faculty union and legal counsel. This meeting is adjourned. As people began filing out, Isaiah remained seated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. His father's name had been spoken with respect in these halls for the first time in over 2 decades. Dr. Moore squeezed his shoulder. Your father would be proud. Isaiah nodded, unable to speak. Justice had finally arrived, decades late, but undeniably real. The investigation moved swiftly. Within 48 hours, Dean Morrison had assembled a formal review committee and issued a university-wide statement announcing a comprehensive examination of Professor Hartwell's academic record and conduct. Dr. Crawford's video testimony had opened the floodgates. By Wednesday morning, 3 former graduate students had contacted the dean's office with similar stories about Hartwell appropriating their research. Maria Santos, now a professor at Stanford, described how Hartwell had claimed credit for her groundbreaking work on prime number distributions in 2003. David Kim, working at a tech company in Silicon Valley, revealed how his doctoral dissertation on chaos theory had been published under Hartwell's name 2 years later. He had a system, Maria explained during her phone interview with the review committee. He would identify the most promising research from students who couldn't fight back, international students, minorities, anyone without connections or resources. Then he would find minor flaws in their methodology, demand extensive revisions, and somehow their best ideas would appear in his publications months before their dissertations were approved. The pattern stretched back 20 years. Hartwell had built his entire academic reputation on stolen work, carefully selecting victims who posed the least threat to his position. By Thursday, the story had reached the Chronicle of Higher Education. The headline read, Whitmore Professor Under Investigation for Decades of Academic Theft. Other news outlets picked up the story, and Hartwell's carefully constructed world began crumbling. Isaiah watched from his dorm room as his calculus professor became the subject of national scrutiny. Social media buzzed with testimonials from former students who described Hartwell's classroom harassment and discriminatory practices. The hashtag #CharnWhitmore Accountability began trending. "23 years," Dr. Moore said when she called to check on Isaiah. 23 years of this man destroying careers and stealing dreams. And it took your courage to bring it all down. The university moved decisively. On Friday afternoon, President Elizabeth Thornton held a press conference announcing Hartwell's immediate suspension pending the investigation's conclusion. His tenure, once seemingly unshakable, was officially under review by the Board of Trustees. Whitmore University has zero tolerance for academic misconduct, President Thornton declared. We are committed to ensuring that all members of our community can pursue knowledge in an environment free from discrimination and intellectual theft. Behind the scenes, the legal implications mounted. The university's general counsel discovered that several of Hartwell's stolen publications had attracted significant grant funding. Federal agencies that had awarded research money based on fraudulent work were demanding explanations. Isaiah received a call from an unexpected source on Saturday morning. Dr. Sarah Chen, editor of the Journal of Advanced Mathematics, explained that they were reviewing all of Hartwell's published papers for potential retraction. Your father's original work was truly remarkable, Dr. Chen said. We want to publish a correction acknowledging him as the rightful author. It won't bring him back, but it's something. The domino effect continued. Other journals began their own investigations. Academic conferences removed Hartwell's presentations from their proceedings. Universities where he had been invited to speak canceled his appointments. By the second week, the review committee had interviewed 12 former students and examined hundreds of documents. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Dr. Moore called Isaiah on a rainy Tuesday evening with the news he had been waiting for. It's over, she said simply. The board voted unanimously. Hartwell's tenure has been revoked. His employment at Whitmore is terminated effective immediately. Isaiah sat on his narrow dorm bed, phone pressed to his ear, feeling something he had never experienced before. Vindication. There's more, Dr. Moore continued. The university is officially crediting your father with the mathematical theorems Hartwell stole. They're also establishing the James Parker Memorial Scholarship for underrepresented students in mathematics. The scholarship would provide full tuition, room, and board for students like Isaiah. Brilliant minds from disadvantaged backgrounds who might otherwise never access elite education. Your father's name will be on that scholarship plaque forever, Dr. Moore said. Every year, students will learn about his contributions to mathematics and his fight for justice. 3 days later, Isaiah watched through his calculus classroom window as security guards escorted Professor Hartwell from his office. The man carried a single cardboard box, his face gray and defeated. Students whispered in the hallways as he passed. His authority completely evaporated. Dr. Moore had taken over teaching Hartwell's advanced number theory class. During her first lecture, she began by projecting James Parker's original theorem onto the whiteboard. This groundbreaking work, she announced to the class, was developed by James Parker, a brilliant mathematician whose contributions were stolen and hidden for over 2 decades. Today, we honor his memory by studying his actual work. The students listened in respectful silence as Dr. Moore explained the theorem's elegance and importance. Isaiah felt his father's presence in the room, finally receiving the recognition he deserved. Local news stations covered Hartwell's departure from campus. The former professor, who had once commanded respect and fear in equal measure, hurried past reporters with his head down, refusing to answer questions about the scandal. Within a month, Hartwell had been forced to sell his expensive home near campus. His wife filed for divorce, citing the public humiliation and financial devastation. The academic journals that had published his stolen work demanded he repay speaking fees and awards. By Christmas, Richard Hartwell was teaching remedial mathematics at Riverside Community College, 40 miles outside the city. The man who had tried to erase Isaiah Parker from academic life had become invisible himself, reduced to explaining basic algebra to unprepared freshmen in a windowless classroom. The investigation's final report, released in January, documented a systematic pattern of academic theft spanning 2 decades. Whitmore implemented sweeping reforms: anonymous reporting systems for academic misconduct, mandatory bias training for all faculty, and independent review boards for tenure decisions. Isaiah's case had exposed not just one corrupt professor, but an entire system that had allowed such corruption to flourish. The reforms spread to other universities as the higher education community grappled with the implications of the Whitmore scandal. Standing in his father's childhood neighborhood in Chicago over winter break, Isaiah visited the small cemetery where James Parker was buried. He placed a copy of the university's official acknowledgement on the headstone. "You were right all along, Dad," Isaiah whispered to the cold granite. "Your work mattered. Your life mattered." The scholarship bearing his father's name would ensure that brilliant students from neighborhoods like this one would have opportunities that had been denied to previous generations. Justice had not only been served, it had been transformed into lasting change. 2 years had passed since that cold December morning at his father's grave. Isaiah Parker stood at the front of advanced number theory, the same classroom where Professor Hartwell had tried to destroy him. But now he wore a different role: teaching assistant to Dr. Moore, who had taken over as department head after the investigation cleared out the old guard. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same wooden podium where Hartwell had scrawled that impossible equation now served as Isaiah's platform to guide the next generation of mathematicians. The chalkboard that had witnessed his humiliation now displayed his careful explanations of complex theorems. Remember, the beauty of mathematics lies not in memorization, but in understanding the underlying patterns, Isaiah told the class of 30 students. His voice carried the confidence that came from surviving academic warfare and emerging victorious. In the third row, he noticed a familiar sight: a young black student sitting alone, notebook open, frantically scribbling notes while avoiding eye contact. Marcus Williams, a sophomore from Detroit's East Side, reminded Isaiah of his younger self. The same hunched shoulders, the same careful invisibility that came from being the only face of color in a sea of privilege. After class, as students filed out chattering about weekend plans, Marcus lingered, packing his books with deliberate slowness. Isaiah recognized the behavior. The kid wanted to ask questions but feared drawing attention. "Marcus, right?" Isaiah approached him with a gentle smile. "I noticed you working through some extra problems during the lecture." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Yes, sir. The material is challenging, and I want to make sure I understand it completely." "Walk with me," Isaiah said, gathering his papers. "I have something that might interest you." They moved through the corridors of the mathematics building, past portraits of long-dead professors whose contributions to the field had been properly credited to them. New plaques honored previously overlooked scholars, including one that read, "James Parker Memorial Research Wing." In his small office, a converted supply room that Dr. Moore had somehow transformed into a functional workspace, Isaiah pulled out a worn leather journal from his desk drawer. Marcus's eyes widened as he recognized the significance of what he was seeing. "These belonged to my father," Isaiah explained, his fingers tracing the faded cover. "He was a student here in the 1990s, brilliant mathematician who never got the recognition he deserved while he was alive." Marcus leaned forward, drawn to the pages filled with elegant equations and detailed proofs. "This work, it's incredible. The approach to solving these problems is unlike anything in our textbooks. My father believed that mathematics was a language that transcended all the barriers society tries to build, Isaiah continued. He taught me that numbers don't care about your zip code, your skin color, or your family's bank account. They only care about truth. The young student's voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here, like I'm fooling everyone, including myself. Isaiah set down the journal and looked directly at Marcus. 2 years ago, I sat exactly where you're sitting now. A professor in this very department tried to prove I didn't belong by giving me an equation that had stumped mathematicians for decades. He expected me to fail. What happened? I solved it in 94 seconds using methods from these notebooks. Isaiah's smile held both pride and pain. That professor thought he could break me, but instead, he helped me discover my father's legacy and my own strength. Marcus stared at the journal pages, his expression shifting from doubt to curiosity, to something approaching hope. Would you? Could you show me some of these techniques? For the next hour, Isaiah walked Marcus through his father's innovative approaches to complex problems. The young man's natural ability became evident as he grasped concepts that typically took weeks to master. His questions were sharp, his insights genuine. You have real talent, Isaiah told him as they prepared to leave. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Marcus hesitated at the door. Mr. Parker, how do you deal with the pressure? The feeling that you're representing more than just yourself? Isaiah considered the question carefully. I learned that carrying that weight is both a burden and a gift. Yes, we're breaking barriers, but we're also opening doors for everyone who comes after us. Your success matters beyond just your own life. The following months brought visible changes throughout the university. The new bias reporting system had processed dozens of complaints, leading to mandatory training for all faculty. Anonymous review boards now evaluated research submissions, removing names and institutional affiliations to focus purely on academic merit. Dr. Moore implemented mentorship programs pairing underrepresented students with faculty allies. The James Parker Scholarship had grown into a full program, bringing talented students from underserved communities to Whitmore with complete financial support. But the most meaningful transformation happened in smaller moments. Marcus Williams joined Isaiah's study group, which had expanded to include students from various backgrounds, united by their love of mathematics rather than divided by demographics. The quiet corner of the library where Isaiah once studied alone now buzzed with collaborative energy. During one particularly difficult problem session, Marcus approached the whiteboard with confidence, explaining a proof to his peers. Isaiah watched from the back of the room, remembering his own journey from isolation to belonging. Your father would be proud, Dr. Moore said, joining Isaiah's observation. She had become not just a department head, but a true advocate for systemic change. I think he would be, Isaiah replied, but I think he'd be even prouder of what we're building. A system where the next generation doesn't have to fight the same battles we did. The semester's end brought news that several other universities were adopting similar reforms, inspired by Whitmore's transformation. Professor Hartwell's fall had become a case study in academic accountability, taught in ethics courses across the country. Isaiah received a letter from Dr. Crawford at MIT, offering him a research position after graduation. But he found himself drawn to staying, to continuing the work of mentorship and reform that his father had started and that he had finished. On the last day of classes, Isaiah stood again at the front of that familiar classroom, but this time he wasn't alone at the board. Marcus Williams stood beside him, explaining a complex theorem to their classmates with the same passion and clarity that had once characterized James Parker's lost lectures. The cycle was complete, yet just beginning. The equation that had taken Isaiah 94 seconds to solve had indeed proven something profound. Not just a mathematical truth, but the enduring power of justice to transform systems, institutions, and lives. As students filed out for summer break, chattering about internships and plans, Isaiah gathered his father's notebooks one last time. The leather covers showed their age, but the ideas within remained as revolutionary as ever. Tomorrow, these same concepts would guide another generation of mathematicians toward discoveries not yet imagined. The fight for equality in academia continued, but it now had something it had lacked before: proof that truth, no matter how long delayed, ultimately prevails over prejudice and power. Now, we want to know what you thought. From 0 to 10, what score does this story deserve?